Welcome to the Limitless Legal Nurse Consulting Podcast. I'm your host, Anna Gray. The best thing about being a nurse and entrepreneur over the last 25 years are the relationships I've developed and the people I've met. As a legal nurse consultant, I wanted you to hear from those amazing people in the legal and healthcare communities. I wanted you to hear who they are and to celebrate them with me. Get ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered. Let's dive into the Limitless Legal Nurse Consulting Podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to the Limitless Legal Nurse Consulting Podcast. I have such a special guest today. I told her before we hit record that I am a fangirl. And if you know her, you are, I'm sure, a fangirl as well. I have Nurse Gwenny here. Coming to us from where in the world do you come from?
Right smack in the middle of the country. I live just north of Kansas City, out on the middle of 10 acres. I bought 10 acres a few years ago. COVID did a number on all of this, myself not excluded. And so my kind of peace, my healing project was I bought 10 acres out in the middle of nowhere and built myself a house.
Oh my gosh. I'm so jealous. I think that's amazing. Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
my kids and I really love it out there. We get to live in the middle of nature and
Yeah.
we get owls that come up and, hoot next to the deck, and we see deer and coyotes and foxes. And unfortunately, we also see snakes. I mowed the other day and I saw my false alarm count was like
Yeah.
1 billion sticks that looked like snakes, but I only had one actual snake. So
Oh my gosh. Well, I guess that's a risk you take. So
it
you
is.
built, so you built the house. Did you design the house
I
yourself?
designed the house, and then I had a construction crew, an Amish crew from up in Iowa that came down, and then I was the general contractor for my own project. I didn't mean to be my own it
Yeah.
just kind of happened that way.
Yeah.
And by the time I got done, I was like, holy shit, I just built a house.
Yeah, that's amazing. And how long did it take you?
3 months.
That's it?
Yes, because I
Wow.
don't do anything slow. So I was pretty demanding of my subs. So it's like,
Yeah,
"Be here on
wow.
Tuesday,
Yeah,
right now,
right.
get it
You're
done."
my kind of girl. That's
Yes.
why, yeah, I like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's why I work in emergency nursing and helicopter EMS, because fast is my only setting.
Yeah, that's amazing. No, I've always wanted to build a house, but every time I've ever heard of anyone building a house, it's taken much longer than expected. And then once they're in the house, it's like they want to sell it because they went through a disaster of a time building it. So you are a success story. I love
Yes,
that. And
it
I
was
would love,
miserable.
yeah, and I live on the West Coast, and so it's like traffic, and so to be
Oh,
out in the peace and quiet, oh, I'm jealous. I'm jealous. So, but thank you for being here. I appreciate you
yeah,
being here. I'm super excited to get to know you further and what you do and how you do things and your whole story. So
yeah,
thank you.
yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned flight nursing, but let's go back a little bit and go back, and if you can share with me kind of your nursing story, how and when you became a nurse, kind of a little bit about your backstory. I love
Yeah,
that
so
story.
nursing, I didn't go to nursing school right out of high school like a lot of folks do. I didn't go to nursing school. I got a full ride at a university that did not offer nursing as a major. And I was like, no big deal. I'll just do pre-med. And so I spent a year as a pre-med major, and I was absolutely miserable. And I was like, I do not want to be in 4 years of undergrad, 4 years of med school, and then at least 3 years of residency. That's like, I do not have the resilience for that.
Yeah.
I was like, no big deal. I'll just pick another major. It's totally fine. I was like 17, 18, and, the world was at my fingertips. I thought I knew everything.
Mhm.
And so I became a psychology major, graduated early. And there's exactly nothing you can do with a bachelor's degree in psychology. I got married super young, started having kids about a year and a half after we got married, put my husband at the time through his master's program. And I kept just thinking about nursing. I was so remorseful that I hadn't said no thank you to that full ride and gone to somewhere else where I could have gotten into what I really wanted to do. And I couldn't get nursing out of my mind. So by the time I considered going back to school, all of my science and chemistry was too old for my first bachelor's. So I had to do a year of prereqs. And then I went through an accelerated program. So if you're unfamiliar with it, It's essentially a 4-year nursing program crammed into 15 months. And it was hell on earth. But I was
Mm.
so glad that I got it over really quickly, and finished nursing school and jumped right into the emergency department and spent a year working at an ER in East St. Louis. We lived in Illinois at the time. And then we moved to Kansas City. I just kind of blankly applied to all the emergency departments in Kansas City. I had no idea the landscape of the hospitals here and took the first job that was offered to me. And it was the level 1 safety net hospital, which if you've ever worked in an urban setting, like
Mhm.
I come a farm girl coming from Southern Illinois, I had no idea. I had never heard of PCP. Where I
It
came
was
from in
like
East
a
St.
culture.
Louis,
Yeah.
we did heroin overdoses all day, every day. And those are so easy, right? Just ventilate those patients until somebody can get a line, give them a little bit of Narcan, wake them up, watch them for a few hours, make sure that the Narcan outlasts the whatever drug they took, and easy peasy lemon squeezy. And I remember my first shift in the emergency department where I had a patient on PCP. I had gotten myself backed into a corner and I just froze. I just froze. And the charge nurse was like, "What are you going to do now, Gwenny?" And I was like, uh, uh, and it's a
Yeah.
B-52 and restraints is usually the answer, because those people are like, they have the strength of Hulk, and they are just, it takes 8 grown men from the security team and a couple of cops and firefighters to hold these people down. And like little
Yeah.
135-pound at the time, Gwenny stuck in the corner. I was like, ah!
Right.
So I learned a lot. It was a teaching hospital.
Mhm.
So I learned a ton. We had some really amazing attending physicians. And so learning alongside the residents, I loved it. I kind of earned my trauma stripes there, working GSW after GSW after GSW. Sometimes all 3 of our trauma bays would be full at the same time, and we'd run a 4th one, like in the
Mhm.
hallway.
Mhm.
But that took a toll on me. And so I was 3 years in there and I was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't get a urinal full of urine thrown at my head every shift. I can't get the ever loving daylights beat out of me all the time and keep doing this. I had gotten strangled by a patient with my stethoscope. I don't wear my stethoscope on my neck anymore for that reason. I had strangulation bruises.
Oh my gosh.
And the final straw for me was I was starting an IV on a drunk patient who was a trauma activation. And he just reached over and put his hand right down my scrub bottoms. They were elastic waist. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. I have to do something else. And I'd always dreamed of flying. And so I thought, well, I will apply. There's no way they're going to take me. Because at the time I was like 3.5 years into my nursing career. And the very minimum that you have to get into flight nursing is 3 years of critical care experience. They prefer ICU over ER, but sometimes they'll take people with just 3 years from the ER. And so I thought, no way they're going to take me, but this will be good interview experience.
Mhm.
And I'll learn what I don't know so that then I can go learn that and be a better candidate a year from now. And I interviewed and they hired me. And I was like, are you sure? Like, I don't know if I'm ready for this. I mean, I'm willing to put in the work.
Yeah.
I will need your help to help get me ready for this. But like, are you sure? And they were like, yep, we're willing to help you and, mentor you. And so I jumped in and I was a pretty good ER nurse. I was a strong ER nurse, which I thought would translate well to being a strong flight nurse. But holy cow, the Kruger-Dunning effect, you have a little bit of experience and you have a lot of confidence. And then as you get a little bit more experience and knowledge, your confidence drops because now I know what I didn't know.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
it was a steep learning curve, but I put in the hours. I was driving 3 hours each way to my base for a 24-hour shift. So I would get up at about 3:30. Now I work at a different base and now I drive 3.5 hours to
Oh,
my base each direction. Yeah. And I
wow.
just bought myself a brand new pickup truck and it
Wow.
gets horrific gas mileage. Yeah.
Wow.
So everyone,
Wow.
please go buy a copy of my book so I can put gas in my
Yeah.
truck this week.
Yes, we will definitely link that in the show notes for sure.
So,
Wow.
I
Yeah.
would get up and at 3:30 and drive 3 hours to my base, but I would listen to podcasts all the way there. I really like Heavy Lies the Helmet with the Boone brothers. There's like Critical Care Now. There's World's Okay Medic podcast. Like, what a time to be alive when we have resources like
Mhm.
the podcasts
Mhm.
that are free. And if you want to
Yeah.
learn, they cost you $0. You just have to put the elbow grease in. So I was listening to podcasts. I was, I like to buy medical textbooks off of like eBay, like get one version older and they're like 25 cents. The new one is like $4 billion for this
Right.
year's copy. But last year's is 25 cents. So
Yeah.
I would order,
Yeah.
pulmonology textbooks and learn about ventilator management, or order a medical student book and learn as much as I could. Learning from my partners at work, just learning everywhere I could. And it didn't take me too long, probably a year, to where I felt like I wasn't so lost that I didn't know my ass from a hole in the ground.
Mhm.
And then probably another year to where I felt pretty comfortable. Um, I never want to rest on my laurels, right?
Yeah.
So I'm
No.
I'm still 6 years into flying. I still work in the emergency department, PRN.
Mhm.
There's still things that I learn every day. And so even in the comments of my videos that I make on Nurse Gwenny, when someone says like, "Hey, I think you're wrong about this," or "Hey, have you considered it this way?" I'm like, "Yeah, teach me. Please
Yeah.
teach me. This is not
Yeah.
a one-way delivery of educational content. This is a two-way street. So please, if I'm explaining it in a way that you don't think sounds right, call me out on it and then teach me and we'll learn together." I
Mhm.
get requests from students all the time. "Hey, can you explain this?" Yep. Sometimes I don't know the answer and I have to go dig for it.
Right.
So just continually learning. I see cases of things that I've still never seen before, like, you
Mm.
know, hemolytic uremic syndrome. I've only ever seen one case of that, and it was a
Mhm.
kid that I flew. So anyway, that was maybe a long explanation of
No,
how
I
Nurse
love
Gwenny
it.
came to be.
No, that's one of my favorite things about this podcast is everybody has a story.
Yeah.
And we're all curious people. We all, especially nurses, we're just curious people. In fact, on my last podcast with a physician, no, with a physician, we were talking about how being in the medical field, we're just naturally curious people. So for us, we want to know your story. How did you come about to be where you're at today? And we'll get into what you're doing today, but I want to kind of backtrack a little bit on that. I love the fact that you shared that nursing wasn't your first degree. I can share that I can relate to that as well. I have my first bachelor's, well, I actually didn't get a BSN. My bachelor's is in exercise physiology. I have a
Okay.
kinesiology degree. I went and got a kinesiology degree because I thought I was going to go to physical therapy school. And then I said, oh crap, I can't do anything with this degree. What do I do? And I went to surgical tech school. Like, all right, we're going to go backwards now. We're going to go to an adult school, a vocational school, and get my surgical tech certification. Oh, wait, I've got all my prereqs done. I might as well go to nursing school. So I had a very similar, you know, what am I going to do in life? And my oldest daughter, just graduated with a biology degree. She graduated very, very quickly, but has this degree. So she's going to go to nursing school and do one of those accelerated programs. So I love that everybody has a different journey. Some of them, a lot of the young nurses I've talked to have gone straight from high school. And that was never even a thought when I was in high school. Nobody ever did that. So it's really, really, I love to hear everyone's story. And then let's go back to the drive, the 3 hour drive I mean, obviously you're doing something that you love. And,
Yeah.
it probably doesn't feel like a commute because you're going to do something that not everybody can say that they do. It's really a mystery to all of us, because like you said, it's really hard to get a job like that. I want
Mhm.
to ask you, when you interviewed for that position, what was that interview like? Did they was it more of like are you a good fit personality wise because you felt like maybe you weren't going to be qualified enough, or was it technical? I'm curious.
So it's a very long process at any. So I
Mm.
have flown for three different companies. I flew for my first company for 2.5 years, took a break off to go travel during COVID, when you needed like a rake and a wheelbarrow for all the money they would pay you. And then I missed flying and went back to it, and it wasn't a good fit for me. I didn't care for the company. I didn't feel like it was safe. And so I only spent
Mhm.
6 months there, and I was kind of sad and thinking, like, I'll probably never get to fly again. And then I found the program that I'm at now. And that's why I drive 3.5 hours to my program, because it is a remarkable hospital based program. So hospital-based programs tend to not have to work the like marketing quite as hard, and you don't have to hustle as a flight nurse. So very little of what we do as a flight nurse for most of the programs in the United States is PR. You're convincing people to call you. You're convincing hospitals and EMS companies to call you. And that wasn't quite as satisfying. But now that I work for a hospital-based program, number one, I get a lot more clinical experiences. If I haven't taken care of a neonate in a good long while, I can go down to the NICU and get clinical time in the NICU. I can go to the OR and I can get some airways in if I haven't intubated in a while. I can go to the ER if there's a trauma case, and some people from our team will get to put in the chest tubes. Even though that wasn't a patient we flew, the doctor will say, hey, why don't you get a chest tube in? You haven't done one in a while. But this program that I fly for is remarkable, a very healthy culture, and that's not something we see terribly often in EMS. So the interview process for pretty much every company here in the US, there's usually an initial intake with just a recruiter, right? Nobody who has experience in actual HEMS. HEMS is helicopter EMS, just to make sure you have all the letters. So you've got to have a lot of qualifications. So your minimum of 3 to 5 years of critical care experience, or for paramedics, it's going to be busy 911 service. And then you have to have your BLS, your ACLS, your PALS. For me as a nurse, I had ENPC at the time, and that does not equate to PALS. You have to have PALS. You have to have some kind of trauma course, and they prefer PHTLS over like TNCC. And then you also have to have NRP, not Nationally Registered Paramedic, but Neonatal Resuscitation Program. And then anything that you have beyond that is just kind of bonus points. And then to fly, if you're going to fly for a CAMES accredited program, which is the Commission on Accreditation for Medical Transport Services, CAMES requires that you have your advanced certification, and they've ruled it down to only accepting CFRN, which is a certified flight nurse offered through the BCEN. They used to accept a CEN, which is certified emergency nurse. They no longer accept that. So you got to have those within a year or two of being hired. And so I actually have 3 of those. I have the CFRN, which is flight, CTRN, which is transport, and CCRN, which is critical care. Right. So you have to have all of those even to get an interview. And if they see that you meet all of those qualifications, then usually you go for just an interview one-on-one with the manager just to see, if you're going to be a good fit for the program. And then you'll have to come back and you do a clinical scenarios where there's a whole panel of people, usually the medical director and the manager and several members of the flight crew. I've got a mannequin in front of me. They give me a clinical scenario, and I have to take over and pretend like I'm in an emergency department receiving this patient. And usually it involves an intubation and drip titration and ventilator management, where I'm titrating the vent to go with the patient, and managing all of these. And then, here's what I would do during flight. Here are my priorities here in the ER. I want to get the patient in the helicopter and go. So we'll do usually 2 to 3 of those scenarios, because they want to see, are you a disaster? Like, are you a mess? Or do you keep a cool head? Because they always throw you a curveball too. Like, hey, that patient you just intubated, now you've just lost your capnography waveform. What are you going to do? And do I say, oh my, freaking out that I've lost my tube? Or do I say, okay, no worries, let me grab my video laryngoscope, get back in there and make sure my tube is seated. So do several of those scenarios. Now, I get really bad stage fright, and I do not like those scenarios. So I really have to dissociate from the whole panel of people that are watching me, right? Yep. And I just pretend that it's just me and my patient. This is just another call. So get through that. And then after that, there's usually another series of interviews with a whole panel of people that are already on the flight crew. And that's usually the culture interview, because they can teach anyone. If you have clinical deficiencies, like as a nurse, I had never intubated before I started flying. So when I got to that part, I was like, I don't know how to intubate. I can tell you this patient does need intubated, but I can't do it. They can teach me that part. They can teach me clinical stuff. They can't teach me how to be a good human being. They can't teach me how to be a strong teammate. They can't teach me how to not be an asshole. Yep. So that's what they're looking for, is someone who's willing to learn. I actually have on my resume, on the bottom corner of it, it says I'm open to the idea of being wrong. Because if I ever think that I've gotten to a point where I don't receive criticism, that I don't receive feedback, whether it's from my followers on Nurse Gwenny on Instagram, or my partner on the helicopter, or a patient or a physician when I'm on an ER shift, if I ever get to the point where I'm not willing to consider that I can be wrong, I'm done. Yeah. I'm done. I need to retire, because I'm done growing. And none of us ever reach a point of arrival. I get some DMs from students that are, followers that are like, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? You're the expert. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm still learning too.
Right.
Like, we're all, even on my last day of work, I still plan to learn something.
Right. No, I love that. I always say we're always a student of the craft, and
Mhm.
sometimes, and that's probably the biggest piece of advice I give, new OR nurses. It's like you're never going to know everything. You're always going to be learning, and as long as you're in that same mindset, then you will continue to grow and learn and not rest on your laurels. I love that you said that
Yes.
earlier.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you for sharing all of the criteria because it's fascinating. It's like this mystery. We know it exists, but there's so few of us out there that have ever heard what it actually takes to become one. Now, when you're on, so you said that there's a team that um flies with you. So what does that look like? It's obviously a pilot.
Yeah. So when I'm on duty, I have one pilot, one flight medic, and me. There's three of us on the team.
Okay.
And so I have an equal scope of practice with the flight paramedic. So either of us can intubate, either of us can titrate drips, either of us can titrate the vent. There are a couple of states out there that have some wonky laws, like Ohio has some weird laws about only the nurse can titrate the vent, not the medic, or something goofy like that. But where I practice in Missouri, we typically the medic sits at the head of the patient and I sit at the side. We fly in an MD 902, and we're the only program in the United States that flies in this aircraft. It doesn't have a tail rotor. So it's super safe. There we have a couple of accidents industry-wide every year from someone driving into a tail rotor or walking into it if it's a night flight, or that's fatal if you do that,
Yeah.
right? And so we have a really safe aircraft. It's a huge aircraft. I've flown for other programs where it's really small. But in my program, that's usually where we sit, but we can absolutely swap seats. And if I say, hey, I haven't managed an airway in a while, do you mind if I sit medic seat? Yeah, absolutely. Sure. I was working with one of my favorite partners the other day. She brings a very maternal vibe, and she's just one of those just healing people. I love being around Meg because she just brings so much joy.
Mhm.
I always can go, no matter what happens, if I'm with Meg, like, we're going to
Right.
figure it out. It's going to be okay.
Mhm. Right.
And I said, I haven't intubated in a really long time. And she said, if we get one today, it's all you. We're switching seats and you're going head to bed. And I
Mhm.
said, okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
So we have equal scope of practice. We work really well together. Usually we each have a skill set that we bring to the table. And, my medic partners usually know, if we've got a lot of drips going on, if we're picking up a patient out of an ICU, they're going to lean heavily on me to work with those drips. Whereas I know if we go to a 5-car pileup and there's going to be patients stuck in the vehicles, I'm going to rely more heavily on my medic to help walk me through, working on the patient while they're still stuck in the car or what have you.
Right. Okay. All right. That makes sense. Um, all right. So I have kind of a fun question. I mean, it's kind of fun unless it's a bad story. But do you have any kind of your craziest situation that you've encountered on a flight or
But yeah, usually
okay.
I get this question a lot, and usually the story that I tell is we got a request for a night flight, and they said, "Can you guys land on a sandbar in a river?" And I was like, I'm up for it. And I looked at my pilot, are you comfortable doing that? And he was like, sure, let's do it. Let's fly overhead and let's see how big the sandbar is. We like 100-foot by 100-foot landing zone, but that's really unrealistic. We almost never have something that big and clear unless we're doing like a football field. That one's
Right.
really easy.
Right.
A baseball diamond, those are pretty easy. But it was a really good pilot. He is a former military pilot, and so he's used to austere conditions. And he was like, let's do it. And my partner that day, it was another nurse. We were flying nurse. Some states allow that. And it was his first flight off of orientation. And I said, Sean, you comfortable with this? And he was like, sure, sounds good. So we landed on a sandbar with, of course, no lights anywhere because it was a river.
Yeah.
And the patient wasn't critical. It's just that they couldn't get her out. She was very tall and very heavy. And so they couldn't climb up the riverbank with
Mhm.
her on a long spine board. She had an orthopedic injury, an open fracture. And so she was of no help being able to get herself out from where she was. Also, please don't go river rafting at night. And if you do, please wear good shoes. That's the lesson here. And so my partner, we landed on the sandbar, and my partner and I waded through water. And I had the first out bag, which has our airway management stuff. And then my partner had the monitor, and he was walking behind me. And I've running water, even or moving water, even if it's just a foot or two deep, it can still sweep you, and you can go ass over tea kettle real quick.
Yeah.
And so I had a volunteer firefighter on each side of me, and we're walking through the river. And the aircraft is still running, so it's like really loud. We can't communicate very well. And I said, "How's Sean doing behind us?" And I look behind me, and no one's helping Sean. I got all the
Oh
help.
my
So
God.
he's holding the monitor overhead so he's not dropping it in the water. And he's like slipping and falling as we're crossing
Wow.
the river. And I'm like,
At night.
somebody help him. Somebody help Sean so that he doesn't fall. And so we get over to the patient. I see that she's totally stable. She doesn't need airway management right now. I said, "Sean, we are not putting her on the monitor to walk back through the water." I said, "Go get the aircraft ready, and I will bring her to you." And so we lift up. She's on a long spine board. It was a wide one, which I didn't realize at the time. That'll come into play later. And she's strapped down with spider straps, which, if you're unfamiliar with those, it's just essentially a web that holds the patient all the way on the long spine board. And we're like, thigh deep in water with this woman strapped to the long spine board. There's 6 of us. It's me and 5 first responders. And we were each she weighed about 300 pounds. So we were each carrying about 50 pounds each. And I thought to myself, if we drop her, she's dead. She has no way to swim. If we drop her, this is the worst idea I've ever had. And I'm absolutely getting fired over this. Like, what was I thinking saying yes to this? And so then I was like, dude, just don't drop her. That's the option here, is don't drop her.
Right.
So we get back through the river over to the sandbar. The firefighters help us to put her up onto our sled, and it's kind of hard to put it. There's a turn as you advance it into the really narrow, because this was for my older program where we had a very small aircraft. And we're putting her in, and I can't get it in. And all my first responder has already crossed back over on the river. All 430 people that were there had their cell phones out and were watching us. We're going to take off from the river. And here I can't get the patient
Right.
into the aircraft. I'm like, oh, come on. It was July. It was hot as could be, super humid. Of course, we're on the river, so the mosquitoes were like this big. And I'm trying to get her. And I'm like, "Sean, this long spine board is too wide. I didn't realize this is like an extra wide one. It won't go in. So we have to get her off of here." So we're like trying to dump her off, and we keep slamming her broken leg against the boom of the aircraft. She's like howling in pain. I'm like, "I am so sorry." And to top it off, as we're trying to struggle through this, I sucked in a giant mosquito into my mouth. And so I'm like retching over the skid. My pilot,
Yeah.
I put my helmet on and plug in, and he's like, "What is going on back there? Like, what are you guys doing? We need to GTFO." And I'm like, "Hang on, I've got to get this mosquito out of my mouth." We finally get her off the long spine board, and Sean starts walking across the river with the long spine board to give it back. I was like, "No, chuck it in the water. Let's go. Somebody else can
Figure
get
it
it
out.
later.
Yeah.
Like, let's go. This is embarrassing." Literally a whole riverbank full of people behind us videoing this. And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, this is so embarrassing. This is going to be on the evening news." Sean comes around his side. We get her in. We're both buckled in. We're like, "Okay, take it off. Let's go." I said, "Sean, give me some fentanyl." He was carrying the narc box that day. I said, "Give me some fentanyl for her, because we bonked her foot
Oh
getting
my
her into the
gosh.
aircraft. She's got an open tib fib." And he's like, "Okay." And then he goes, "Oh shit." And I was like, "What, Sean?" And he reaches down into his leg pocket, that's like on his ankle,
Yeah.
which was fully submerged in the water. And he pulls out the Pelican case and opens it, and water goes and spills out of the. I was like, "No." I said, "Give me a vial. Surely it's intact." The cap was still good. It was intact.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
medication was it was
Right.
unadulterated. So I was able to give her a dose. It was like, a 7-minute flight to the emergency department. We walk in, we're just drenched in water and leaving a trail of mud. And the staff are like, "Where have you been? Do not ask questions. Please just take this patient.
That's
Except
awesome.
report, I need to get out of here. I need to go back to the base and shower and dry my boots." There was an inch of standing water in the aircraft.
Oh my
It
gosh.
was
That's
wild, but
crazy.
it was. We laughed so hard about. I still have a picture from that flight that I think I'll keep forever. We
Yeah.
looked disgusting. Like, the humidity. I was
Right.
looking just
All of
absolutely
the
snatched.
all of the elements. That's amazing. That's
Yes,
I wonder if the patient remembers any of the craziness.
she did. She brought me flowers after she got off of
Aw.
crutches. Yeah, she
Yeah.
came to see us at the base. She got to see the
Yeah.
aircraft in the
Yeah,
daylight. She
yeah,
showed her
yeah. Oh, that's
kids.
great. So you got
Yeah,
closure and got a
yeah,
little laugh about it, I'm sure. That's
yes.
awesome. So with all of that and you're dealing with this aircraft, the training around an aircraft, I mean, had you flown much before? What does that training look like? Do you get
I
training?
so I had never flown in a helicopter before I took the job. My first flight was on the job. Um, and as it turns out, I don't get motion sick on boats,
Mhm.
cars, or anything like that. I do get motion sick in a helicopter.
Wow.
So I actually keep alcohol swabs in my breast
Uh-huh,
pocket. And
uh-huh, uh-huh.
if you see me out there huffing one of those, it's because I'm about to blow groceries. And so I have
Wow.
never thrown up. I
Yeah.
have gotten very close. But windy days are hard for me. Flicker vertigo is hard. So when it's a really sunny day, the rotor blades, as they're spinning, will cast a shadow from the sun. And so it's, hundreds of
Right.
times per minute. It's so fast that like I don't consciously pick up on it, but my
Sure.
brain does. And so
Sure, sure.
sometimes I'll get a little bit queasy. But yes, it is a lot of training. We get a mandatory 5-hour training called in and around the aircraft
Okay.
before you're even allowed to step foot on the
Right.
helicopter. And so we understand a little bit of the avionics and just, aviation in general, but there's a lot of TLAs, a lot of 3-letter abbreviations,
Yeah.
AGL, MSL, VFR, IFR. And so I remember when I first started flying, I was like, I don't understand any of this. But that was one
Yeah.
of those points I had to jump in and learn. So
Yeah.
I've got a couple of pilots that just love to teach. They're really big
Oh,
aviation nerds, and I
yeah.
love to just sit with them
Sure.
and learn how
Sure.
airplanes and helicopters work.
Yeah. Lifelong learner. There you go. I
Yeah,
mean, it
yeah,
works in all aspects.
yeah,
Yeah, that's always been fascinating. It's like, what kind of experience do you need with that? And I guess you just learn, which is, I guess it's just like anything else.
yeah. The
Um,
questions I always get
yeah,
are, "Oh, so do you know how to fly the helicopter?" Absolutely not. It's not like getting in a
yeah,
car and like, they're
sure.
all pretty much the same. No, absolutely not. I have flown a simulator once, but it's much easier to fly an airplane than it is a helicopter. Helicopter takes a ton of training, and they have to have 1,500 hours as the pilot of a helicopter before they can even come to him. So it takes a ton of experience.
Right.
The bulk majority of our pilots come from the Army. They do a lot of helicopter
Oh,
work.
yeah,
And the other
interesting.
question I get is, do you wear a parachute? And no. And so then the follow-up question is, well, what do you do if the helicopter crashes? And the answer is I die, right? That's the
Yeah.
only option. But
I mean, that's the
like,
risk, right?
yes, but there is no vehicle more cared for in the world than
Mm.
helicopters.
Mhm,
The
mhm,
maintenance on them, I mean,
mhm,
if we get in the aircraft and it doesn't smell right,
mhm.
we shut it down. We don't take the flight. If
Sure.
something sounds different, like, you get in a car and you're like, I don't think I've ever heard it make that noise before. No worries, I can have my dad look at it in a few days. It'll be fine,
Right,
right?
right.
We don't do
Don't
that in
do
the
that.
aircraft. We take
Yeah,
no risks at all.
sure.
And we all do walkarounds before every flight. I walk around and I look at all the little latches, all the cowlings. I look at the tail. Does
Mhm,
everything look right to me? Okay.
mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
Right, and
So it's really
everybody
weird.
does that.
Yeah. And I
Yeah,
don't
that
I
is
don't fear crashing at all.
right.
I have a much higher risk of dying in my truck on the way to work than I do in a
Sure,
helicopter.
sure, and of course, what you see out there too, and you can
Mhm.
you can justify that as well. It's like, well, I see this every day, and the chances of me on the
Mhm.
road versus in the sky, I'm sure, yeah, and you just yeah, like you just have to know that before you get into it. You're like,
Yeah.
I have to be okay with it. Um, Now, when it comes to nursing, you're you're obviously making decisions, quick decisions. Are you following a certain protocol? Are because
Mhm.
we have the question of, what orders are you following? Are you following your own orders? How does that work on the nursing side? Because this is a nursing podcast.
Yeah, sure.
So
We have protocols that are really just guidelines. And
Mm,
so I have another benefit of working for a hospital-based program is we're a small program. We have 2 helicopters and 1 ambulance. We all rotate on all 3 of them. But we all know our medical director. When I used to fly for that really big company, our medical directors barely knew us, even if they
mhm,
knew our names at all.
mhm,
But our medical director knows us so well that he trusts us. And he says, here is what the guidelines say. But if you have to do something that's out of protocols, as long as you can justify to me why you did it and it makes sense, I'm going to back you up. If
right.
that ever gets called into court, I will say they have my blessing to do what needs to be done if it's the
Mhm,
most right thing for this patient at this time. And I can't think of a time when I've ever had to practice outside of protocols.
mhm,
But yeah, we have those memorized. And so that's a lot of work as well. When you start with a new program, you got to read all those protocols. And so
mhm.
one thing that I do is every single time I drive to work, I do not like to be late. I get there in time to spend 5 minutes in my truck reading a protocol. I usually just like, play roulette, just
Yeah.
flick my finger through the protocols, and wherever it lands, that's the one I read that day. And so it might be extremity trauma. Yes, I know how to take care of extremity trauma, but I'm still going to read every word in that protocol just to remind myself of,
Yeah.
okay, like, oh yeah, I totally forgot that we can, XYZ.
Mhm.
Or like, oh yeah, TXA didn't come to my mind right away. I was thinking about tourniquet and managing and splinting, but yes, TXA is very important.
Mhm.
So studying those protocols on a regular basis, even if it seems like old hat. I went to BLS a few years ago, and the instructor recognized me as one of the flight team members, and he said, "Oh, this is probably so boring. You do not need to be here." And I said, "No, I want to be here. There is always an opportunity for me to learn something, even if it's at BLS."
Yeah. 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 That makes sense. And you forget things. I mean, I've been doing it for 25 years. It's like every time how many, you just forget because there's so many things to know and there's so many things to remember that you just have to be open to continually learning it because it's just too many things to remember.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so, okay. Have you, and then obviously we were talking about, you just mentioned the fact that if you were called to the stand, would you be able to justify that? I'm guessing that's never happened before.
It has not. I have
Okay.
never been deposed. I have
Yep.
never been subpoenaed. And I don't like to teach or practice in such a way to avoid legal. Like, I know
Sure.
that some instructors, when they're teaching, they're like, don't do this because that'll get you called to court. And don't do that because that'll get your license revoked. I don't teach or practice from a perspective of avoiding legal trouble.
Yep.
I just kind of do the best right thing, do
Yep.
what is expected of me, try to go beyond the bare minimum, right?
Yeah.
And just do the right thing, and you never
Right.
will find yourself in trouble if you're doing the right thing.
Right.
But the idea of being deposed or being put on the stand terrifies me.
Right.
I do not like conflict.
Yeah.
And so if someone argues with me, if it's not a hill worth dying on, I just let them. I'm like, okay, that sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
I really like peace. I
Right.
work really hard to achieve this peace in my
I
life, especially in the last few years, and no one is allowed in Gwenny's circle of peace unless
Yeah,
they belong
I
there.
I totally get it, and that's you and I are very similar, and my friends used to call me Switzerland because I didn't like conflict. It was like, I'm gonna be right, I'm neutral, Switzerland, call me Switzerland. It just we don't need to go either way. So I can totally relate to that. Um, Okay, so then the question also, because my listeners are nurses from all different fields and specialties who are legal nurses, who are always looking for nurses in other specialties.
Yeah.
So if one nurse happens to come across a legal case that um, it has to deal with, flight nursing, would you be open to looking at those records and helping out these nurses? Because that'll be the
Absolutely.
question. That'll be the next question that they will ask me. Is she can we reach out to her if I have a case where I need some help looking at these records to understand whether or not protocol was followed, standard of care was followed. So, um,
Yes. I think that sounds like really fun work
yeah,
to do some expert consultation, but the moment a lawyer raises their voice at me, I'm gonna
yeah,
be like, "Sir, check
yeah.
yourself,"
Okay, you're
because
definitely behind the scenes kind of gal.
yes.
Like, let me look at the records and I'll tell you whether or not they followed protocol, but that's where I
Yes.
stop. Okay,
Yeah.
that's good.
Yeah.
That's really good information. And just so you all know, there you go. You've got your flight nurse, Nurse Gwenny here to help you out. And let's see. The last question I'm going to ask you is, well, besides for your mention of your book, where do you see yourself in the next 5 years? I like to ask that question because, sometimes we put things out there or we're afraid to put things out there. I'm always a risk taker when it comes to that. Just put yourself out there. So where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I have actually not put this out publicly anywhere. My significant other and my couple of close friends and mentors know this, but I've never put it out there for anybody else. I would like to create some CE courses. So nurses that work in the emergency department or ICUs at a hospital, that if they're a stroke center, a STEMI center, or a trauma center, we have to have 8 hours of cardiac a year, 8 hours of stroke education, and straight 8 hours of trauma. So cardiac, trauma, stroke. I don't know if I said those all three. Um, but I would like to create CE courses for them because I think a lot of the education out there, like Health Stream, I'd rather walk on a bed of Legos than take a health stream course. And so I want to make it really affordable too. I'm not out here trying to get rich quick or anything, just
Mhm.
help me be able to raise my kids and live in my little corner of the world.
Mhm.
But make them affordable for nurses and make them really fun. Like education does not have to be boring. Like I remember fighting to stay awake in nursing school. I mean, in their defense, I was also working nights. So like there would be 48 hours where I would never go to bed.
Mm.
But education should not lull us to sleep. We should be laughing. We should be engaging.
Yeah.
We should be, using multiple parts of our brain because literature shows that we retain more information with more parts of our brain that we engage. So if I can get somebody to laugh, that's gonna that's going to engage another part of their brain and increase the chances that they're going to retain that information. Or if I can tie it to a funny story, like, hey, this one time I gagged on a mosquito and barfed over the
Right.
skin of the aircraft, they're going to remember
Right.
that story.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to make CEU courses and put them out there. I would love to develop a couple of test prep courses and maybe go out on the road. And so my full-time job is that I teach for Impact EMS.
Mhm.
We have a critical care flight provider course that we travel all over the US teaching that, but I would like to do that in nurse form and probably leave my full-time job at some time in the next 3 to 5 years so that I can just grow. Nurse Gwenny, I never want to leave the bedside. I love patient care. So I have a full-time job where I teach, I fly at least one 24-hour shift per week, and then I work about 3 to 4 12-hour shifts in the emergency department per month. Between my significant other and I, we have 5 children. I have 10 acres I take care of, a dog and 2 cats. So it's a lot. It would be really
Yeah.
easy for me to have less work, but I love what I do at all 3
Mhm.
jobs so much that, like, I have real bad FOMO.
Mhm. Right. I totally
So
get that.
yeah.
And I wanted to say, if for those of you who have not watched Nurse Gwenny's videos, you do you share things, you teach things in such a way that is incredibly engaging, even for us old nurses. They're so much fun to watch. And that's actually how I reached out to you because your videos popped up on my feed and I couldn't stop watching them. And I mean, you we I was showing someone one of your videos and it was talking about blood and calcium, and you had 2 bottles of milk, and the way that you related it, I was like, "Oh my gosh, that totally makes sense." And all of your education is like that. So it's such a gift for people, for nurses, for new nurses, for young nurses, that you're sharing things in such a way that makes it interesting, that makes it enjoyable, that makes it make sense. I'm telling you, there are things that you say that I never understood in 20 years, never understood. But the way that you explain it, it's like, oh, that makes sense. So it'll be a gift for you to be able to create, learning these things so that you're creating better nurses. You're helping to create better nurses, which when it comes to, us on the legal side too, that's what our goal is to educate nurses so that their charting is, you're covering all of your bases and you're not missing anything and you're not missing any sort of standard of care. So everybody wins. But yeah, it's such a treat to watch your videos. And I really, really look forward to seeing you, in the next 5 years, just killing it. I mean, you already are. So,
Aw, thank
um,
you. That means a
I,
lot.
oh yeah, no, it's really enjoyable. It's really enjoyable. Everybody, please, please go watch Nurse Gwenny's um, videos and reels and share them on your social. Okay, so that being said, where can we find you? And this will all be in the show notes so everybody can click on it quickly. But where can we find you to
Yeah, sure.
yeah.
So my educational videos, I try to keep them under 90 seconds each. I don't always make it under 90 seconds. I can never remember my handle, so I have to look up my own Nurse Gwenny handle. So on Instagram, I'm Nurse Gwenny RN. On TikTok, I am just search for Nurse Gwenny and you will find me. So I'm on Instagram and TikTok doing my education. And then I have two books. They're only available on Amazon. I only have one of them with me because I'm at my significant other's house, not my house. But this is my most recent book. This is called 50 Reminders, Affirmations, and Gut Checks for Nurses in the form of Bible verses, quotes, and a few swears. And so I just took like different quotes, whether it's from movies or, Beatles song lyrics or, just from famous theologians and poets. Maya Angelou, she makes an appearance here multiple times. I just put it on pretty paper because we see so many terrible sights as nurses. We see mangled bodies, we see suffering, we see pain, we see death. And sometimes we just get really tired of seeing the
Yeah.
horrors
Oh
that
yeah.
this world has to
Mhm.
offer. I don't tell my mom any stories from work
Mhm. Mhm.
because she does not have the capacity to be able to hold that grief. And that's something we're expected to do as nurses. So I have a quote, and then on the back of each page, I break that down and apply it to nursing. So, like this page, every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. And then I just talk about no matter what mistakes you've made in the past, there's always hope for you to do great things in the future. So don't let your faults from yesterday define who you are today. And this book is not designed to like sit on a shelf somewhere. It is designed for you to tear a page out, hang it in your locker, or if you see that one of your teammates is having a really crummy shift, find one that, really suits them. Write your little love note in the margin. I left room on every page and leave it on their nurse's station, their desk or what have you. So that's one of this is really cheap. It's like $14 on Amazon. So just search for 50 reminders, Nurse Gwenny, and it'll pop right up. My first book that I have is a textbook to prepare you for critical care. So if you are looking to get into flight, or maybe if you're a new grad hoping to go into the ER or into the ICU, that book is for you. It's called But Why. If you just search But Why, Gwenny Lawson, it'll be the first thing that pops up. It's the same color scheme of my logo, and it's 309 practice questions with the correct answers and rationales to help get you ready for critical care, especially if you're planning to sit for your CTRN, your CFRN, your CCRN, or for my medic compadres, that's your FPC or your CCPC. And so for me to understand something, I have to know the why. Like, yes, you can tell me that the first step in treating hyperkalemia is to give calcium, but I'm gonna need to know why. Like,
Mhm.
why? Because that doesn't bring your potassium down. But what it does do is it stabilizes the cardiac membrane and buys you time to then come in with some dextrose insulin and get them to dialysis. So it teaches you the but why, so you're not left wondering why. Our brains are old. I will be 39 tomorrow. I have limited reserve
Oh
in
yes.
here. I can't learn facts. Okay. I need room for song lyrics and great
Yeah.
jokes,
Yeah.
movie quotes. So I can't memorize facts anymore, but what I can do is I can understand a concept. And
Mhm.
then whether it's with a patient or in front of a test, I can walk myself to the correct
Mhm.
answer. So
Mhm.
sometimes you'll see me like, okay, yeah, I'm there. Like, it
Mhm.
takes me a second because I have
Totally.
to walk myself through, like, if I'm looking at someone with advanced hemodynamics and I'm looking at the readouts, I'm, like, imagining the blood going through the heart, and I'm like, "Okay, if my cardiac index is low and then I have a right I okay, on the right side, okay, I know what it is, it's cardiogenic shock," right? It just takes me a
Yeah.
second to get there, and so
Yep.
my book explains things in a way that you'll understand why at
I
the end of
love
it and
that.
not just memorizing what the
I'm
facts.
such a big fan of that. Everybody in the OR will tell you that that's how I love to teach. It's like if you understand the reason why, you will never have to memorize a thing again. It doesn't have to be a checklist if you
Yes.
understand the reason why. So, I'm so glad that that's what your book is. It's amazing. And your other book is right up my alley. For those
Oh,
that will watch this on video, my bookcase is all personal development. So you're a girl after my own heart. I'm very, 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 very glad that I met you and that we had this conversation. And I'm going to continue to fangirl. And I know that you'll have a whole bunch of other fans, fellow nurses, MDs, attorneys that will be, cheering you on and just really supporting. It's a great community. So I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you sharing all of your story and, who you are. So thank you so
thank
much.
you. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks to the viewers for listening.
Thank you for joining us in this fun conversation on the Limitless Legal Nurse Consulting podcast. I hope you found this episode as inspiring and empowering as I always do. And I hope that you share this episode with your friends. If you enjoyed it, I would love it if you could leave us a review or comment, as I would love to share them in the future episodes. Or hop on over into my DMs and send me a quick message. I can be found on Instagram at anna.b.gray, on my website at limitlesslnc.com, and over on LinkedIn at Anna Gray. And I want you to remember, you are limitless. Until next time.